I pulled myself together the morning after my boyfriend's family trip, sitting on the edge of the hotel bathtub, staring at my phone like it had personally betrayed me. My name is Meredith. I'm 31 years old, I'm a licensed pharmacist, and up until 8 days ago, I genuinely believed I was about to have the family I always wanted. I need to back up. My boyfriend, I'll call him my boyfriend because that's all he ever really was, no matter what he told me every night before we fell asleep, came from money. Old money, the kind that doesn't talk about itself. His father had built a regional bank from nothing in the 80s, his mother sat on 2 nonprofit boards, and chaired the annual charity gala for the Children's Hospital, and his sister had married into a family that owned half the commercial real estate in their county. They were the kind of people who smiled at you during dinner, and then said something just sharp enough to draw blood before dessert arrived. He and I had been together for 2 years. We met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner, and I remember thinking that night that he seemed almost too good. Attentive, funny, genuinely curious. He asked me real questions. He remembered things. He called when he said he would. I had dated enough men by 30 to know that those qualities were not guaranteed, so I held on. The first time I felt something was off with his family was at Thanksgiving the year before. His mother, a tall woman who wore her pearls like armor, looked at my contribution to the dinner table. A cranberry walnut tart I had spent 2 hours on, and said, "Oh, how sweet, we usually use the bakery on Henderson, but this is very homemade." She smiled. His sister laughed. He said nothing. I told myself I was being sensitive. By the following spring, he and I were talking seriously about the future. He had asked me, twice, if I would consider relocating closer to his family when the time came. I had said I would think about it. What I was really doing was stalling, because something in me had started paying attention to patterns I couldn't name yet. The trip came up in June. His parents had rented a lake house in northern Michigan for 10 days, one of those sprawling properties with a private dock and a chef's kitchen, and enough bedrooms that you could genuinely go half a day without running into someone. His mother called it a casual family gathering. I would find out later that there were approximately 40 people invited over the course of those 10 days, including 2 of his father's business associates and their wives. I almost didn't go. I had a quarterly inventory audit coming up at work. I was one of 3 pharmacists managing compliance for a mid-sized regional chain, and we had flagged some irregularities in our controlled substance logs the month before. It wasn't a crisis, but it wasn't nothing. The kind of situation where your name is attached to the resolution, where you do not want to be unreachable. But he said it would mean everything to him. He said his parents were making a real effort. He said this trip was different. I packed my work laptop. My manager knew I would be checking in remotely. I had everything I needed to handle anything that came up from 300 miles away. What I did not account for was the wine. The first evening was fine. Dinner on the back porch, the lake going gold in the last of the daylight, his relatives asking me polite questions about my work that I could tell they found boring. His mother seated me at the far end of the table from him. I noticed. I didn't say anything. The second evening, his sister opened a bottle of red that she described as from a small vineyard outside of Charlottesville. You probably haven't heard of them. I took half a glass to be polite. I remember thinking it tasted slightly off, like something had been sitting open too long. I mentioned it, and she said the tannins in that particular grape could seem unusual at first. I set the glass down and didn't finish it. The third evening, I woke up on the sunroom couch with no memory of getting there. I had been at the dinner table. I remembered his uncle telling a long story about a fishing trip. I remembered asking for water. I remembered nothing after that. My watch said it was nearly 2 in the morning. The house was quiet. I sat up slowly, and the first thing I noticed was that my cardigan, a navy one I had buttoned to the top before dinner because the evenings were cool, had 3 buttons misaligned. The second button was in the 3rd hole. The 4th button was skipped entirely. I stare at those buttons still in my memory sometimes. I know how I dress myself. I have been dressing myself for 3 decades. Those buttons were not wrong when I sat down to dinner. The second thing I noticed was that my phone was on the side table and it was warm. Not screen warm, warm like it had been held. I picked it up. It was locked, so whoever had touched it hadn't gotten in. But my home screen background, a photo of my dog that I had set over a year ago, had been changed to the default factory wallpaper. You cannot do that without unlocking the phone. Except you can if you trigger a failed biometric enough times and force a full reset of the lock screen display. I sat there for a long time. I went upstairs. He was asleep, or pretending to be. I lay down next to him and stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. The next morning, I told him what I had noticed: the buttons, the phone. He laughed. Not unkindly, the way he always managed to soften things, but he laughed. He said I'd probably just had too much to drink and fumbled with my cardigan on the way to the couch. He said the phone thing was probably a pocket reset, that those happen sometimes. He said I worked too hard and I was looking for problems because I didn't know how to relax. I nodded. I told him he was probably right, and then I went to the bathroom, locked the door, sat down on the cold tile floor, and opened my work email on my phone. There was a notification I hadn't seen: a remote login alert from our pharmacy management system. The system was set to flag any access from an unrecognized device or location. The alert had come through at 11:47 p.m. the night before, while I was unconscious on the sunroom couch. Someone had attempted to log into our controlled substance audit database using my credentials. They had failed. The system required a secondary authentication code sent to my work phone, which was locked and which had apparently resisted whatever they tried. I sat on that floor for 20 minutes. Then I splashed water on my face, walked downstairs, poured myself coffee, and smiled at his mother when she offered me a blueberry scone. I am not a dramatic person by nature. I am methodical. I spent 7 years in school learning to be precise, to verify before I act, to understand the difference between a suspicion and a confirmed fact. So I did not confront anyone. I did not cry. I did not pack my bag and call a rideshare at 7 in the morning. What I did was call my best friend from the back porch while everyone else was eating breakfast. She had worked in HR for a decade and had a steel spine and a very calm voice. I told her everything in under 4 minutes. She said, "Okay, first thing, do you have any way to confirm what was in that wine?" I said I didn't. I had barely touched it the previous night, but I had finished almost a full glass the night I blacked out. She said, "Can you get a blood test today without anyone knowing?" There was an urgent care clinic about 12 minutes from the lake house. I told him I was going to drive into town for a few things I had forgotten to pack. He offered to come. I said I needed some alone time. That was true enough. He kissed my forehead and said, "Of course." The clinic was small and quiet on a Tuesday morning. I spoke to the nurse practitioner directly. I told her I suspected I had been given something without my knowledge 2 nights prior and that I needed a comprehensive tox screen. She looked at me steadily for a moment and then said, "Let's get that done." She was matter-of-fact in the best possible way, no drama, no excessive questions, and she told me results for most compounds would come back within 48 hours. I drove back to the lake house with a protein bar and a bag of coffee grounds I had picked up at a gas station, so I had something to show for the errand. His mother said, "You went all the way out for that?" I said the brand mattered to me. She smiled the way she always did when she thought I was being particular about the wrong things. By the time the tox results came in, 2 days before the trip was scheduled to end, I had been piecing everything else together. His sister's husband worked in commercial lending. I had known that in a vague way, the way you know things about family members you don't see often. What I hadn't known was that 2 weeks before the trip, our pharmacy chain had been in early-stage conversations with a regional private equity group about a potential acquisition, and that the PE firm had ties to his father's bank. If our internal audit showed irregularities in our controlled substance logs, the acquisition would stall or collapse entirely. If someone could access our database and introduce additional irregularities, the value of the chain would drop, and the acquisition terms would shift dramatically. I found this out because I called my manager, the one person at work I trusted completely, and told her someone had attempted to access my credentials remotely. She went cold on the phone. She said she was going to loop in the compliance officer and that I should not discuss this with him until I was back in the office. I said, "I need to ask you something first. Do you know if there's any overlap between the acquisition group and any banks in this region?" There was a pause. She said, "Where are you right now?" I told her I was at his family's lake house. A longer one. She said, "Meredith, come home." The tox screen came back positive for a benzodiazepine. A low dose, not dangerous, but enough to cause the kind of sedation I had experienced. Enough to make a person sleep deeply and remember nothing. The nurse practitioner called me directly and asked if I wanted to involve law enforcement. I said I was already working with my company's compliance team and that I would let her know. I sat in my rental car in the parking lot of a gas station 3 miles from the lake house, and I made a list of everything I knew. He had known which nights I drank wine at dinner. He had known I was working remotely on a sensitive audit. His father's bank had financial interest in that audit going a certain way. I had been sedated on at least one occasion, possibly 2. My credentials had been used in an access attempt while I was unconscious. My phone had been physically handled. What I did not know yet, how much he knew. Whether he was a knowing participant or a useful instrument, I spent the last 2 days of the trip finding out. I didn't have to manufacture much. I mentioned casually at dinner one night that I was thinking about rotating my login credentials when I got back. Standard security hygiene, I said. I did it every quarter. His sister's husband asked, with just a little too much interest, whether the system would notify my manager when credentials changed. I said yes, automatically, and I watched his eyes do something small and quick that he controlled almost immediately. That was enough. I had already sent copies of the login alert, the talk screen results, and a summary memo to my company's legal department and our compliance officer. I had CC'd my personal attorney, a woman I had used twice before for contract questions, who had responded to my email at 10 o'clock at night and said she was taking this very seriously. I drove home the day before the trip officially ended. I told him I had a work situation that couldn't wait. He seemed surprised but not alarmed, which told me something. He hugged me at the door of the lake house and said he'd see me at home in a few days. I hugged him back. I was very warm about it. I had not decided yet exactly what shape the end of this would take, only that it would take a shape he was not expecting. My attorney and I met with our company's legal team the following week. The compliance officer had already been in contact with the DEA because attempted unauthorized access to a controlled substance database is not a civil matter, it is a federal one. His father's bank connection to the PE firm became relevant context in that conversation. I did not need to push for that, I just gave them what I had. His brother-in-law was the first one they went to. I don't know exactly what was said in that meeting, but I know that within 2 weeks he had retained his own attorney and was cooperating with investigators. In these situations, the first person who cooperates is usually the one who wants to walk away with the best outcome. He made that choice quickly. His father's bank was referred for regulatory review. The acquisition of our pharmacy chain was suspended pending investigation. 2 other pharmacists at our company, people I did not know well, were flagged for having been similarly targeted by unauthorized access attempts, which meant I was not the only one, and my access had been chosen not just because of my relationship to their family, but because of my specific role in the audit. When I finally told him it was over, I did it on a Saturday morning at the kitchen table in the apartment we shared, with 2 coffees sitting between us. I had moved most of what I cared about to my friend's place over the preceding 2 weeks. Nothing dramatic, just a bag here, a box there, the way you take a long time to leave when you're being careful. He looked at me across the table, and I could see him trying to calibrate. What did I know how much? Was this about the trip or something else? I told him exactly what I knew. All of it. Quietly and in order. When I finished, he said, I didn't know they were going to go that far. I had suspected he would say something like that. It confirmed the thing I had been unwilling to sit with for 3 days, that he had known something. Not everything, maybe, but something. I stood up, put my coffee cup in the sink, picked up my keys, and left. His brother-in-law ended up charged with unauthorized access to a protected computer system and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. His father's bank was fined in a regulatory action, and 2 board members resigned. His mother and his sister were not charged. The investigators determined their involvement couldn't be established beyond coordination that stopped short of the criminal act itself. I think about that sometimes, the way certain people manage to participate in something terrible and still walk away clean in the technical sense. But they know what they did, and they know I know. I got a promotion 4 months later. My manager cited my handling of the security incident as evidence of exactly the kind of judgment and composure the compliance director role required. I moved to a new apartment, smaller but mine, all the way mine, with a little balcony where I can see a sliver of skyline if I lean over the railing. I still make cranberry walnut tarts sometimes. Mine are better than anything that bakery on Henderson ever produced. I know that now in a way I didn't when I was trying to earn approval from people who had already decided I wasn't worth giving it to. Some doors close and you think it's a loss until you're standing on the other side and you can breathe again for the first time in 2 years. That's where I am now. I breathe fine here.